Thank you very much for inviting me here. Been to a few CAFNEC events over the years, and hopefully I can help explain how sustainable cities is not a, well, it's making me sick. It's a reasonable proposition to work on, and to see what kind of future cities we're moving towards. The three shaping forces that I will use, obviously climate change driven decarbonising is a big factor, as is peak oil driven sustainable transport and biodiversity driven regeneration. Those three factors to me are going to shape our future cities, as well as the context that cities are there because they create opportunities for us that you can't get outside cities. Cities have economic and social opportunities, and so we have to respond to these three things, but at the same time create livable cities that provide these opportunities. So we've got climate change. The atmosphere is warming. Amazing that we managed to do it, and that we're melting the ice, and that we're causing cities to have major problems. Like this is New Orleans, but it could have been Brisbane. And in Perth, we've got this extraordinary long-term drought that has just is clearly related to climate change. This is the groundwater from which we extract our water supply, and in the last 10 years, we've now built 2 wind-powered desalination plants. So Perth is now 50% desal. It's a city that has had to adapt very quickly to having very much reduced water supply, and the state government recognised some time ago that it was due to climate change. So we all know we've got to get to that brown line, we've got to go down to the in the reduction scenario by 2050. And we've had the most god-awful debate on climate change in the political system finally over, and we have our clean energy package and joined the rest of the world, even though we kept saying that we were out in front. What it means for cities is still unknown. It clearly is going to cost more for carbon, and that will affect our cities. But peak oil worries me more in the immediate sense. It is something that is very current. We are approaching a practical limit to the number of barrels of crude oil pumped every day. That was on the Wall Street Journal in 2007, pretty much as it was happening, and as was predicted a long time ago by M. King Hubbert, and he also predicted it for the US in 1970. It happened. It's been going down ever since. They're 80 or 90% depleted now, and it is happening as we speak. I've never seen anything like this before. Yeah, the fuel just ran out. Peak PowerPoint. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm speechless without my PowerPoint. But there is a publication called Nature, which is probably the top scientific journal, and in that journal in the last couple of months there was an article by the former chief scientist from it doesn't look good, does it? Former chief scientist from the UK, who has shown that peak oil has happened, and that we are now hard up against a limit. Now, if you in your own life can show, and in this city can show, that you're going to need no more oil than you've been using, that it's in fact going to go down each year from here on, then you'll be okay. If you can do that in your own life. But that's what the world now faces. Each year, less oil than the year before. Can you do that in your own life? Can you do that in your suburb? And the oil production has not risen for 5 years. So we've had this peak in the price, and it's now almost back up to that again. On the right there are some suburbs in America that were abandoned when the price hit $140 a barrel, and which led to the GFC happening. These places have still not been re-inhabited. This is the Nature article, and it shows the blue line there where the plateau has happened in the production cycle, and the price is just inevitably going up. And this is showing the wall that it's hit. You cannot get beyond that. If you want to look at a YouTube video, the global tipping point with the discussion led by those two authors is there. So I would say the same thing. It is going to affect our cities. They're going to be shaped differently. In the same way, we've got the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that Ian talked about this morning, with this appalling state of the world's biodiversity all going down. What does it mean for our cities? You won't find much in that report on cities. So it does lead people to think that the whole system's going to collapse. When you put these three factors together, and Jared Diamond's book is worth reading, and there's a lot of peakers' websites that will depress you. If you look at history, Ephesus collapsed because it cut the forests in the surrounding area and their port was silted up. Same thing happened in Babylon, the great city of the ancient world, where the Euphrates River just shifted after they cut all the surrounding forests. So resilience is a word that is used more and more to try and come to terms with this. My sense is that we are going through a time of transition, and it is possible to imagine a new green economy emerging as the sixth wave, as it's called. The other waves were all eras of that arose out of depressions, and we are now facing a new green economy. Can we get there, or is it a collapse scenario? The green economy is symbolised in South Korea by this project. The freeway there completely obliterated a river, the Chongachang, and it was a sacred river. 7 or 8 years ago, there was a mayoral election where one candidate put up his hand to say that he would take that freeway down and regenerate the river. And he did it and created this 10-kilometre long park. The amazing part of the story is he was the engineer who built the freeway. Now, he didn't do too badly in his political career. He's now the president of South Korea. And he says, if you want to imagine the green economy in our cities, imagine the Chongachang. It is now an extraordinary thing to have a regenerated river and going through the centre of this city, replacing a freeway. Now, if ever there was a symbol that I like anyway, the river of life flowing through Seoul is it. There's no doubt that in each of the eras in the past, we had different energy sources and different transport choices that shaped our cities. And it's not certain how our cities are going to emerge from this, but we've got a bit of an idea. And some cities are going to struggle. As is my PowerPoint. One of the things we do is collect data on cities. The highest using fuel city in the world is Atlanta. It uses 108 gigajoules per person of transport fuel, gasoline. In Australia, cities we use around 30, 35. The American cities average in the 50s. What I like to compare Atlanta to is Barcelona. Barcelona uses 8 gigajoules per capita. And Barcelona has a very similar per capita wealth to Atlanta. 107 compared to 8. Now, you start to wonder, how is Atlanta going to face this future? I'm a bit wary of pressing this too hard. This is Atlanta. It's got 18 counties of sprawl with virtually no public transport, just a little bit in the central area. There's no way you can do much about that reaching most of these areas. They're just scatter. They're not even sprawl. They're scatter. And it's going to really struggle. The price of fuel going up, it tripled in 2007-8 when the GFC happened. And these are the kind of suburbs that will struggle in the future. Barcelona will survive, of course, because you can walk and cycle and the metro there. It's all very neat. However, you can't just say, oh, we'll bulldoze Atlanta and build Barcelona there. You have to make something of these cities. And our work has constantly shown that density is very critical, that the density of the city and the transport fuel use are very highly correlated, and they're exponentially related. So if we can just begin a little density increases, particularly in certain places, you will drop down that graph very dramatically. And that's what the cities of the world have to do. So the future city, if you want a picture of it, is the polycentric city where you put centres, you develop centres in the suburbs linked by good quality public transport. That means that those suburbs then have a centre nearby where there are jobs and services and schools and shoppings and all of those local facilities, but also a good public transport link. So you can get to there and get to the rest of the city without needing a car. It's a vision that nearly every city that I talk to now says they want. They want to be a polycentric city. The last 50 years have been scattering because you could always get there by car. Now that's under question. So Vancouver has now built something like 20 of these sub-centres. And you see the normal suburbs are there, around it, unaffected. But in that new centre, which is on their SkyTrain, they have a lot of services and facilities that are close by, and it enables that public transport to work. Now we are in the business of looking at sub-centres in cities and trying to assess them, and we've done some work with Kinesis and their model that shows if you have that array of technologies, which includes as much photovoltaics as you can get in there, it's got a cogen system, it's got all the energy efficient buildings and water efficiencies and so on, and a high frequency light rail. If you have that, you can get a 36% less car use, 23% less embodied CO2, 55% less greenhouse gas and energy, 75% less water, and 17% more affordable housing, and it only costs $5,600 per block. So any developer, any local government, any state government will say, oh, we can do that. We thought it was going to be so expensive to add all these things on. But if you do it from the start with those technologies, you can design it in a way that makes sense economically, and all of those sustainability gains can be made. So you do these centres all over the place in the city, and that is where you begin to transform the future. Now, is it going to happen? We had a question from down the table here this morning saying, well, we've heard these things before and we know nothing much is happening, so why isn't it? Let me tell you a little bit of the good news. There are some surprising trends. Firstly, in 2008, there was peak fossil fuel power investment. At that point, renewables investment was more than fossil fuel investment. It's now 2 to 1. So there's a lot of investment going into the renewables. It is coming on so dramatically that we've got lots of conspiracies to try and stop it. The second one is that in 2004, industrial cities began to show peak car use. Car use is going down. You probably haven't heard about it. And at the same time, dramatic increases in sustainable transport. The third thing is peak power consumption in Australia and in the UK has happened. This is the UK data showing, it was actually earlier, around 2004, and it's mostly come about because of the heating reductions, but it is happening and it is going down. The car use growth trends are quite dramatic. We have seen these declines, and then we've started to pick up actual going down. And in the US, in 2004, you can see that blue line, it started going down at about $80 a barrel. And so you've got this dramatic increase, especially in light rail, 7.1%, 4% decline in car use. In Australian cities, all Australian cities began declining in 2004. Even Canberra, Hobart and Darwin, where there's no congestion. So it had to be something like fuel that was doing it. And at the same time, big increases in public transport in Melbourne, in Brisbane, in Perth, not much in Sydney because they're already full, and almost nothing in Canberra, Darwin and Hobart. What does that tell you about the cities that don't have rail? If you don't have a decent option, people are not getting out, they're not transferring, but they're not driving much more either. So there's an awful lot of pain happening there. It's mostly younger people. So in the under 30s, the red areas there are big reductions. The baby boomers like me, we're still driving, but we're dying out. And the younger people, mostly, are getting their freedom and flexibility in other technologies, the social media devices. Look at all the people in the train here. This is in Seoul, some of them on 2 devices. And it makes a very big difference. So there is a cultural change occurring. Richard Florida said this in an article this week. Cars are so yesterday. And the numbers are showing that younger people are decreasing their use of cars from 10,300 miles to 7,900 miles per capita in the US, and a 100% increase in biking, in public transport, 122% in biking, 37% in walking. These are dramatic figures. What about the third world? I'm sorry, I've got to go for another 5 minutes. I've just been given time. It might have been from 1:30, but I didn't start now. Shanghai, dramatic change, and everybody is so scared about the Chinese cities growing. But they started flirting with the American model and they built freeways, which very rapidly filled. There's not much you can do when you get to that point, and if you've got a high-density city, that's what happens quickly, well before the American sprawl. So what did they do? They built the world's biggest metro in 10 years. 420 kilometres of metro. It now carries 8 million people a day. Now in Chinese cities, 82 of them are building metros. 14 Indian cities are building metros. Most of the Middle Eastern cities are now building metros. There is a dramatic change occurring in the world's transport systems. And even in little old Perth, we decided to start rebuilding our rail system. Look at these data compared to Adelaide. We had a Southern Railway built which has done that real boost there. 19% increase in last year in the Southern Railway. You can do it. So there are zero carbon buildings happening, there are zero carbon precincts, there are zero carbon cities like Mazda. And it is pretty dramatic to see what some of these cities are doing. This is how it looks now. There are zero carbon cities being built in China, and there are funding mechanisms for it, and as some of them were described this morning. On Infrastructure Australia, we put $4.6 billion into urban rail. That had never happened before in the history of Australia. The federal government put money into urban rail because they were the best benefit cost ratios. They came out really well. The Gold Coast has put in a light rail. Now that corridor that runs down is not really that different to Cairns. It's not in your perceptions that this is a viable system because you've been told that it's not viable. But what is our future going to be if we don't get into electric rail at some point? Every city's going to have to do it. And it is, I think, a next phase for the Canberras and Hobarts and Darwins and Cairnses. It is possible to do, and it is possible. I'm going to have to leave it there anyway. But the final word I have is, I went to Christchurch recently, looking at how they're picking up after the terrible earthquake, which was so devastating. They have had a very good engagement process to say what kind of city do they want for the future. They have said they want a green city, they want it compact, and they want light rail. That is their number one request. A small city like Christchurch says, if we're going to rebuild ourselves, that's what we want. We do not want car dependence. That's the future, I think, of every city that's going to be serious about these issues. Thanks.